It was just another average Tuesday. Or so Rachel thought. She was hustling through the midday rush at La Villa's Grill, the small neighborhood bistro she worked at in the heart of Eastwood District. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept the bills paid and her dreams afloat. At 23, juggling her senior year of college, part-time shifts, and the weight of family responsibilities, Rachel learned how to smile when everything hurt, how to pretend like the world wasn't crashing around her. And then, the man walked in. With a gait that suggested years of experience, his worn-out shoes and faded coat made him stand out in a place where most patrons dressed to impress. He scanned the room, his eyes full of hesitation, as if unsure of the space he was entering. The others didn't notice him. The regulars never did. Rachel did. "Good afternoon, sir. Would you like to sit by the window?" She smiled, her voice warm, genuine. He nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time, and something flickered behind them, a silent gratitude that Rachel couldn't quite place. As she led him to his seat, a quiet whisper passed through the room. No one knew it yet, but this unassuming stranger was about to change Rachel's life forever. The sun bathed the city in a golden light, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of Eastwood. The air was thick with the sound of honking horns, clacking heels, and the distant hum of espresso machines from the corner cafes. La Villa's Grill sat nestled between a laundromat and a flower shop, ivy crawling up its brick facade like nature's attempt to dress up the simple building. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with its usual energy. Waitresses darted between tables, balancing trays filled with orders, while the kitchen, 2 seconds from chaos, spat out dish after dish. The hum of conversation mixed with the clatter of dishes and the occasional sharp orders from the back. Rachel moved gracefully through the mess, her dark curls bouncing as she maneuvered between the tables. She was 23, working 2 jobs to fund her education and care for her younger sister. The weight of responsibility was heavy on her shoulders, but she never complained. It wasn't how she was raised. Her mother had always said, "Patience and kindness will take you further than any loud voice." Rachel had learned to blend into the background, to remain unseen yet always present. It was a skill she perfected in this small restaurant, where customers came and went without ever remembering her name. But she didn't mind. She wasn't here for fame, just for survival. As the lunch rush intensified, Rachel refilled drinks, delivered orders, and greeted patrons with the same steady smile, never once letting the exhaustion show on her face. That was until she noticed him, an older man, dressed in a faded coat and worn shoes, walking through the door as if he didn't quite belong. He moved like he was outside the rhythm of the restaurant, and Rachel's eyes lingered on him, a strange curiosity stirring within her. When their gazes met, she saw something in his eyes, a quiet sadness, perhaps, or maybe just an old man lost in thought. Rachel stepped forward. "Would you like to sit by the window?" she asked, her voice soft yet welcoming. He nodded slowly, and Rachel led him to a small corner booth away from the noisy crowd. She could have sworn he sighed in relief as he settled into the seat. She quickly set down a glass of water in front of him, her fingers brushing lightly against the rim of the glass, offering him a kind smile. "Take your time," she said gently. "No rush." The restaurant continued to swirl around Rachel. The orders came in, the kitchen was on fire with demands, and her colleagues hustled to keep the chaos in check. But the man by the window remained a constant in her mind. His presence was like a slow, steady hum in the background, something different, something quiet. Rachel kept an eye on him from time to time, watching as he took his time with the menu, his fingers trembling slightly as he traced the prices. His hesitation was familiar to her, she had felt that same unease many times when she had to count every penny to make ends meet. Tina, her colleague, leaned in as Rachel returned to the bar. "You're too nice, you know," she said, rolling her eyes. "These people don't tip extra just because you're nice to them." Rachel shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Maybe not. But I'm not stopping because of it." Tina scoffed and turned away, muttering something about wasted effort. She was in her mid-30s, a bit jaded, and had learned to pick out the big spenders who could afford to be generous. Rachel had never been that way. She noticed the people who felt invisible, the ones who looked like they didn't belong. When the man finally ordered, it was a simple request, "Just the soup," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "No bread. Water's fine." Rachel smiled. "The vegetable soup. It's fresh today. Carrots, thyme. You'll like it." He nodded, folding the menu like it was fragile. When Rachel returned with his meal, she noticed him again, his fingers fumbling in his coat pocket as he hesitated before pulling out some crumpled bills. She knew the look on his face, the quiet panic of someone deciding if they had enough to cover the basics. She didn't mention it. Instead, Rachel reached into her own pocket and pulled out the last crumpled $5 bill she had from her previous shift. She handed it to the cashier with a quiet request. "Add a roll," she said, "but don't let him know it wasn't comped." The man's eyes softened when she brought the bread to his table, and his gratitude was more than a simple "thank you." It was a recognition of something deeper. Something rare. Rachel returned to the chaos of the lunch rush, but she couldn't shake the image of the man from her mind. She watched him quietly, sitting at his booth by the window, savoring his soup as if it were the last hot meal he might have for a while. His every movement was deliberate, as if he had learned to cherish even the smallest moments of peace. Around her, the restaurant buzzed with activity. Tina, as usual, was making snide remarks about the customers, her eyes scanning for the big tippers. But Rachel wasn't concerned about tips. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man. His demeanor, his careful attention to his meal, it was as though he had lived through something that made him appreciate simple kindness. She noticed his clothes, a little worn, certainly, but not in a way that screamed poverty. It was as though he had chosen to wear them, to fade into the background. Unlike the other customers, he didn't try to demand attention. He just wanted to exist, quietly, in a space that didn't judge him. As she walked by his table, Rachel smiled softly. "How's the soup?" He looked up, startled, before nodding. "It's perfect. Thank you." That simple acknowledgement sent a wave of warmth through her. She didn't expect anything in return, but something about this man, sitting in his worn coat, left a lasting impression. She moved on, serving the next table, but there was a shift. She felt lighter. Sometimes, kindness wasn't about getting something back, it was about giving something away, even if it was only a smile or a simple gesture. The rest of Rachel's shift seemed to fly by, but her focus kept drifting back to the man by the window. She hadn't seen him interact with anyone else. He just sat there, eating his soup slowly, his eyes occasionally flickering up, looking at people without truly seeing them. It was when the end of the lunch rush came, and the restaurant began to empty out, that Rachel noticed something. The man was fumbling through his wallet, pulling out a few crumpled bills. He looked uncertain, counting them twice. His movements were slow, almost hesitant. She had seen that hesitation before, in herself, in her own moments of doubt when she wasn't sure if the money in her pocket would stretch far enough. She glanced over at Tina, who was wiping down the bar and giving the man a quick, dismissive glance. "That guy's not tipping," Tina muttered. "He's nursing that bowl, till dinner." Rachel didn't care. She wasn't here for the tips. She went to the register, took the last $5 bill from her apron, and passed it to the cashier. "Add a roll," she said. "But don't tell him it wasn't comped." She returned to the man's table and set down the soup with the fresh bread, smiling warmly. "Chef added this today," she said, "it goes great with the soup." The man looked up at her then, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of gratitude that made her feel like she had done something right. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of activity. The noise of the restaurant, the hum of conversation, the clattering of dishes, all of it seemed to fade into the background as Rachel kept her eye on the man. He was still there, slowly eating his soup, but now, she noticed something else. He was no longer in a rush to leave. When it was finally time for him to pay, Rachel approached his table. She smiled at him, asking if everything had been to his liking. He looked up at her with his soft, weathered eyes and nodded, but then hesitated. "I think I have enough," he said, his voice a little shaky. Rachel leaned in, offering him a smile that had become second nature. "Don't worry. It's just the soup and water, no tax on the bread. You're all set." He blinked, and for a moment, Rachel thought he was going to say something more. But instead, he reached into his wallet again, pulling out a few crumpled bills. He slid them across the table toward her, a $10 bill and a few singles. "Keep the change," he said, his voice more certain now. "And thank you." "Really?" Rachel blinked, a little surprised. This man had hardly said a word, but there was something about the sincerity in his voice that made her feel like he truly meant it. She nodded, grateful, before walking away to the register, her heart a little lighter than before. As the restaurant slowly emptied, Rachel kept busy with the usual post-lunch cleanup. But something kept pulling her attention back to the man at his table. He was done with his soup now, but instead of getting up and leaving, he lingered, his eyes scanning the room. It was then that he looked up at Rachel, his face more open, more appreciative than before. He fumbled in his coat pocket again, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. "This isn't much," he said, his voice a little rough. "But if you have a moment, later today, or tomorrow, give it a call. Just a conversation. You've got a good heart, young lady. That's rare these days." Rachel hesitated. She didn't know what to make of it. A note? A request for a conversation? But there was something in the way he handed it to her, gentle, almost reverent, that made her take it. She glanced at the folded paper before slipping it into her apron pocket, unsure of what it all meant. He left soon after, slipping out of the restaurant and disappearing into the crowd outside. Rachel stood by the counter, the note still in her pocket, wondering if she should reach out. What could it hurt? Later that evening, after her shift ended, Rachel sat on the bus ride home, her mind replaying the events of the day. The man, the soup, the note. It was all so strange, so out of the ordinary. She pulled the note from her pocket, smoothing it open. The handwriting was neat and careful, the ink slightly faded from being folded for so long. It read simply. E.L. Grant. Phone number. Don't judge the wrapping. Some gifts are quiet. Who was Edward L. Grant? What did this mean? Rachel sat there on the bus, the words swirling in her mind, the city lights flickering outside the window. She didn't call immediately. There was something about the note that felt like the first page of a story, but she wasn't ready to turn the page just yet. By the next day, Rachel had almost forgotten about the note. The restaurant was busy as usual, and the day had been filled with its usual routine, orders, drinks, and cleaning up after customers who came and went without giving much thought to the people who served them. But then, in the middle of the lunch rush, the note found its way back into her thoughts. She kept glancing at the folded piece of paper in her apron pocket, the weight of it pressing against her side, reminding her that she hadn't let go of that lingering curiosity. When the shift finally ended, she sat on the curb, her apron still tied around her waist, and pulled the note out again. This time, she held it longer, looking at the name again, Edward L. Grant. Something about that name felt significant, like it belonged to someone important. With a deep breath, she pulled out her phone, looked at the number, and dialed. Hello. The voice on the other end was deep, warm, but with a certain edge to it. Hi, this is Rachel, from La Villa's Grill, she said, her voice a little unsure. I got your note. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment, Rachel thought she'd made a mistake. But then the voice spoke again. Rachel, I'm glad you called. I was hoping you would. Let's talk. I think we might have a lot to discuss. Rachel felt her heart race. This was no ordinary conversation. She had no idea what she had just stepped into, but something told her that this was the beginning of something big. Rachel arrived at the address Edward had given her, a tall, modern building that towered over the surrounding structures. She felt out of place in her casual clothes, but the security guard at the entrance merely smiled and waved her through. The elevator required a fingerprint scan to access the top floor, a small reminder that this was no ordinary office. When the doors opened, she stepped into an immaculate space, far more elegant than she ever could have imagined. The walls were lined with photos of chefs in bustling kitchens and patrons enjoying meals in luxurious dining rooms. It felt more like a gallery than a corporate headquarters. Edward was waiting for her. Gone was the worn coat and tattered cap. He now stood tall in a sleek charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. He extended his hand with a smile that was both warm and commanding. "Rachel," he said, his voice like a smooth melody. "You saw me when others didn't. You gave when you had little. You did the right thing without anyone watching. That's rare." Rachel shook his hand, still unsure of what to say. But as they sat across from each other, she could feel the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just a meeting. It was something more. Edward leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving Rachel's. "I founded this company not just to serve food but to build a culture," he said, his voice steady. "We run over 100 restaurants across the country, and lately, I've been looking for someone with the heart to remind my teams what service really means: grace, humanity, hospitality." He gestured toward the office's large windows, offering a panoramic view of the city below. "I want to offer you a position, Rachel. Not just as a server, but as our new training manager for ethical service standards." Rachel blinked, taken aback. "Training manager?" Edward smiled. "You'll help us develop and lead programs that teach our teams how to serve with dignity, compassion, and respect. I don't need credentials. I need conviction. And you, Rachel, have it in abundance." Her breath caught in her throat. The thought of leaving everything she knew, everything she had worked for, seemed impossible. Yet, in that moment, she felt as if she had been handed a chance to do something meaningful. Rachel spent the night unable to shake Edward's offer. Her mind kept drifting back to the restaurant, to the people she knew, to the life she had built in that small bistro. Could she leave it behind? Could she step into a world so different from what she had ever known? The next morning, after hours of tossing and turning, Rachel knew she couldn't let the opportunity slip away. She packed up her things, her apron still tied around her waist as she walked through the familiar streets of Eastwood. Everything felt surreal. Was this really happening? When she arrived at La Villa's grill that afternoon, she found herself standing at the hostess stand, looking at the worn-out doorframe where she had spent so many hours. Her co-workers were chatting in the back, unaware of the change that was coming. As she walked past Tina, who shot her a knowing glance, Rachel paused. "I have to go," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I've been offered something big." Tina didn't seem to fully understand at first, but when she saw the determination in Rachel's eyes, she nodded. "Well, you deserve it, girl." And just like that, Rachel left her old life behind. The following days felt like a whirlwind. Rachel signed her contract, received her new title, and began working closely with Edward on the company's ethics programs. But there was something that stayed with her, the quiet confidence she had seen in the man who had changed everything for her. Her first meeting at the company was nothing like what she had imagined. She found herself in a conference room with regional managers, HR directors, and even the marketing executives. The room was filled with sharp, professional people, all eager to meet the soup girl, as they had started calling her behind closed doors. At first, Rachel felt like an outsider, unsure of what to say or how to contribute. But as the meetings progressed, she found her voice. She didn't speak in corporate jargon, nor did she try to mimic anyone else. She spoke from her heart, recalling moments from her time at La Villa's grill when kindness and empathy had made all the difference. Edward watched from the sidelines, nodding with approval as Rachel spoke. He never interrupted, never tried to steer her. He simply let her be herself. Rachel's first official week on the job was overwhelming, to say the least. There were meetings to attend, programs to design, and staff to observe. But through it all, she carried with her the lessons she had learned at La Villa's Grill. She wasn't there to be just another cog in the machine. She was there to make a real difference. She spent time traveling to different locations, from high-end urban restaurants to smaller suburban franchises. She observed how service was delivered, how staff were treated, and how biases often slipped between the polite words and forced smiles. Rachel wasn't trying to change the system overnight. Instead, she was trying to remind people of what service truly meant. It wasn't about sales or tips, it was about presence, dignity, and respect. As she moved forward, she felt like a different person. A person with a purpose, with a voice that had been waiting to be heard. Rachel had been with the company for a few months now, and while her responsibilities had expanded, so had the pressure. Edward had entrusted her with the task of developing a nationwide training program on ethical service standards. The weight of it was daunting. She spent countless nights writing modules, reading case studies, and preparing to present the program to the company's senior leadership team. It felt like a constant uphill battle. Her days were filled with presentations, emails, and conference calls. But as the days wore on, something began to gnaw at her. The enthusiasm she once had for the job was slowly being replaced with frustration. She felt like she was losing herself in the process, caught between the vision she had for the program and the demands of the corporate world. One morning, as Rachel walked into the office, she was greeted by Edward's assistant. "Mr. Grant wants to see you," she said, her tone brisk. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She had been so caught up in her work that she hadn't even realized it was time for her quarterly review. Rachel entered Edward's office, the room still as pristine and cold as ever. Edward stood by the window, looking out over the city, his silver hair catching the light. His back was turned when she walked in, and for a moment, the weight of his silence felt suffocating. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair in front of his desk. "Let's talk." Rachel hesitated, sitting down slowly, feeling the tension rise in the air. Edward turned toward her, his eyes sharp, analyzing every inch of her. "I've been watching you, Rachel. And I've been hearing the feedback." Rachel's stomach tightened. "Feedback? What are they saying?" Edward's expression remained unreadable. "You've made an impact in some areas. But in others, well, let's just say you're not quite meeting the standards I expect." Rachel's pulse quickened, her mind racing. She had been so sure she was on the right path. She had poured everything into this job, sacrificed time with friends, family, and even herself. "I know you're trying," Edward continued, "but we need results, Rachel. You're not just here to develop programs. You're here to shape the culture. And that takes more than good intentions." The word stung, a harsh reminder that success in this world was about more than just effort. It was about results. Rachel struggled to hold back her emotions. She had been working tirelessly, only to find herself falling short of expectations. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need more time. I can fix this." Edward regarded her for a long moment. "Time is something you may not have. I'm giving you one last chance to prove yourself. If you can't make this work, we'll have to rethink your position here." The cold finality of his words hung in the air as Rachel stood up, feeling the weight of her future pressing down on her. That evening, Rachel returned to her apartment, her mind consumed with thoughts of the review. Edward's words echoed in her head, over and over. She had worked so hard to get here, to make a name for herself. But now, it felt like everything was slipping away. She collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking. She looked around the small apartment, cluttered with textbooks, papers, and the remnants of a life she hadn't had time to live. It was all too much, the constant pressure, the endless hours, the feeling that no matter what she did, it was never enough. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking her thoughts. It was a text from her sister, asking if they could meet up the next day. Rachel hadn't seen her in weeks, too busy to even have a conversation. She typed back a quick reply, agreeing to meet, but her fingers hesitated before hitting send. Her family had always been her anchor, her support system. But now, even they felt like a distant memory, buried beneath the demands of her career. Rachel stared at the screen, wondering if the price of success was worth the toll it was taking on her. She had dreamed of this life, but now, she wasn't so sure. The next day, Rachel met her sister at a cafe in Eastwood. As they sat across from each other, her sister could tell something was off. Rachel's eyes were tired, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her thoughts. "Talk to me," her sister said, leaning forward. "What's going on? You've been distant lately." Rachel hesitated, the words catching in her throat. But her sister's concern was genuine, and after a few moments, she finally spoke. "I don't know if I can keep up with this job. The pressure, it's overwhelming. I thought I was ready, but I feel like I'm failing." Her sister's eyes softened. "Rachel, you're not failing. You're doing your best. But maybe it's okay to admit that you can't do it all on your own." Rachel let out a shaky breath. "I thought this job was my big break. But now, it feels like I'm losing everything. I'm not sure what I'm even doing anymore." Her sister placed a comforting hand on hers. "You've been through a lot to get here. But it's okay to take a step back. You don't have to sacrifice everything for this job. You deserve a life outside of work too." For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Her sister's words hit home. She didn't have to keep pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion. Maybe it was time to reassess, to find a balance. The following morning, Rachel walked into the office with a renewed sense of clarity. Edward had given her a deadline, a final chance to prove herself, but this time, she wasn't going to let the pressure overwhelm her. She had spent too long trying to meet others' expectations, to prove her worth. But now, it was time to prove something to herself. She was more than just a cog in the machine. She was a person, with needs, desires, and dreams of her own. That afternoon, as she sat down to meet with Edward, she felt a surge of confidence. "I've thought about what you said," she began, her voice steady. "And I've decided that I need to take a different approach." Edward raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "I'm not going to rush this. I want to do it right. I'll take the time I need to truly shape the culture I want to build. I'm asking for more time, more support. If that's not something you're willing to give me, then maybe I'm not the right person for this job." The room was silent for a moment, Edward studying her carefully. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I can respect that," he said. "Let's see what you can do, Rachel. I'm giving you the time you need. But I'll be watching." As she walked out of his office, Rachel felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in weeks. The weight of the world wasn't on her shoulders anymore. She had taken control of her own path. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but now, Rachel knew she was ready to face whatever came next. Rachel knew this would be no easy task. With the extra time Edward had granted her, she set out to rebuild the training program from the ground up, but this time with a new perspective. She started by visiting the restaurants herself, observing the staff, and talking to them about their experiences. She asked questions about what they needed, what they felt was missing, and how they saw themselves in the bigger picture of the company. At first, she felt like an outsider, but the more she listened, the more she realized that the key to changing the culture wasn't just about the service, it was about the people. They needed to feel valued, respected, and seen for who they were. Rachel spent weeks crafting new materials for the training program, modules that went beyond the surface-level notions of customer service. She included stories, personal experiences, and real-life examples. She wanted to create a program that didn't just teach employees how to serve but taught them how to connect with others on a human level. As the months passed, Rachel's program began to take shape. The first pilot training session was set to launch at one of the restaurants in the company's flagship cities. It was a small, intimate gathering of regional managers and staff members, all eager to see what Rachel had come up with. She stood in front of the group, her hands slightly trembling, but her heart was full of purpose. The program she had created was something she believed in deeply. It was about empathy, dignity, and authenticity. It was about creating a space where employees felt empowered, not just as workers but as people. The feedback was overwhelming. For the first time, Rachel felt that the effort she had poured into this was truly making an impact. The employees felt heard, respected, and inspired to bring their best selves to the job. They weren't just following a script, they were building connections with customers, and more importantly, with each other. With the success of the pilot program, Rachel knew she had something powerful on her hands. The company had already taken notice. Edward, too, was impressed by how quickly Rachel had turned things around. What started as a simple request for a cultural shift had blossomed into a full-scale transformation. But the pressure didn't let up. Rachel was now tasked with rolling out the program nationwide, and that meant navigating complex logistical hurdles, pushing for the resources she needed, and continuing to build support from every corner of the company. There were days when she felt overwhelmed, when the weight of it all seemed too much. But each time she returned to the training room and saw the positive changes in the employees, she remembered why she was doing this. This wasn't just a job, it was a mission. She couldn't stop now. Not when so many people were counting on her. Rachel's program began to spread to other cities, and the impact was undeniable. Restaurants that had previously struggled with high turnover and disengaged employees were now seeing happier, more motivated staff. The culture was shifting in real time, from the top down to the bottom. Managers were more involved, employees felt valued, and the customers could feel the difference too. It was during one of these moments, sitting in a small, quiet office after a particularly successful training session, that Rachel received the call that would change everything. "Rachel," Edward's voice crackled over the line, "I'm not sure how you're doing it, but I've never seen anything like this. The numbers are off the charts. I want to offer you something." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "I'm offering you a leadership role in the company's expansion project. You'll lead the charge in bringing this program to every new restaurant we open. It's a six-figure salary, with a full relocation package, and you'll be working directly with me. Are you ready for this?" The offer felt surreal, but Rachel didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." The days that followed were a blur. Rachel had finally made it. The program she had created, the culture she had built, was now being integrated into every new restaurant that opened under the company's umbrella. She was no longer just the soup girl from La Villa's Grill, she was now a key player in an organization that had grown exponentially under her influence. As Rachel stood in the bustling office that now felt like home, she couldn't help but think back to the days when she was just trying to make ends meet, when she thought this kind of success was impossible. The woman who once thought she had nothing to offer had now become a trailblazer, and she wasn't done yet. She had found her place in the world, and it had been built on kindness, empathy, and a deep belief that service was more than just a job, it was a calling. And as she walked out the door to meet her team for the next big project, she thought about the one thing that had gotten her here: consistency and kindness, the same values her grandmother had instilled in her all those years ago. Her journey had only just begun. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about Rachel's journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep bringing these meaningful stories to life. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you can be the first to hear about the next chapter in Rachel's story. Thank you for being part of this incredible journey with us.